What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Before the Whistle. I'm your host, Maddy, and I'm not going to lie, I am still very much feeling this past Saturday where I was on the sideline for the Green Wave's loss to the Ole Miss Rebels, something I'm going to break down in today's episode. But as usual, you can hear it in my voice, which I thought I wasn't yelling as much. And quite honestly, I was just kind of getting into it with the crowd at Yeoman, which was a positive in and of itself. But I'm here to be kind of the positive light looking at this weekend while contorting my body perhaps in a very odd way. I somehow pinched a nerve over this weekend, and that made craning my head in the press box to look at the Saints game on Sunday quite difficult, and is making sitting in this chair and looking correctly at the camera a little bit of a struggle in and of itself. But just as I made my way through those 4 hours on the sideline on Saturday, I am going to do my best to break down this episode while looking at you guys on camera. Now, I'm not in the business of moral victories or being a homer to the detriment of my analysis, but I really implore people to not overreact to this loss when you consider what Tulane was looking at heading into this matchup, being down their starting quarterback who was essentially perfect in the air the week prior, had all of these accolades for what he was able to do, and just seeing how much he's able to bring to the table in terms of leadership. And that's something that you saw Michael Pratt still continue to do on the sidelines in this game. But really his ability to read defenses and pick apart their weaknesses and use his legs. I know that Kai Horton had a few rush attempts during this game, but knowing that that's something much more in Michael Pratt's repertoire just goes to show you why that makes the passing game just a little bit easier, and why those quarterbacks that can convert downs with their legs really have a lot better time at the office most often than not. But I think that you saw a lot of position groups step up. You saw answers at a lot of position groups that had a lot of question marks going into this game. Talking about losing Michael Pratt on offense, you lost your quarterback. Oops, sorry, I need to stop with my neck. On defense, if you will, in Corey Platt, who was the linebacker that led the team in tackles in the South Alabama win. I believe he had 15 total and just was all over the place, and really was kind of that spy that was able to read the quarterback and make those run stops. Tulane, for all intents and purposes, shut down the rushing attack for Ole Miss in this game. And it was really by a lot of the play at linebacker, including what they were able to do on several key downs. And I'm going to kind of run through those drives in just a moment here, but I'm not someone that always takes that much away from the numbers of a game, because I think that the benefit of being a sideline reporter and, you know, what we all see on TV and whatnot is everything that happens in between those numbers, all the context, all of those things. And knowing that most people watching this episode are aware of the context of this game, I think it's worth bringing up what those numbers were like in comparison to the 2021 contest. I know that things couldn't be more night and day in terms of where Tulane was standing as a program, what they were able to do and prepare, and the conditions of living and practicing going into said matchup. But leaving the Hurricane in the 2021 mirror as much as I can, you still, I think, are able to see a lot more promise coming out of this game that had a lot of question marks. Again, like I said, at several key roles. And when just, again, looking at that and comparing it briefly to the 61-21 loss, which was a 40-point loss compared to, I think it was 17 and 37-20. I'm trying my best to do the math here. Both teams had 18 first downs on Saturday. In the first matchup that I'm talking about in the 2021, Tulane had 14 first downs and Ole Miss had 41. Tulane was 9 of 22 on third downs on offense for this matchup, which gives them about a 41% completion rate. They were 1 of 11 when they went to Oxford in 2021. Where Ole Miss was 50% on their third downs with 9 of 18 in that 21 matchup. And we're only 1 of 13 this past weekend. It's the fourth downs that kind of killed the team at times, but not even really at other times. They were just able to kind of convert on first or second down, but they were 3 of 3 on fourth downs, whereas Tulane was only 2 of 5, which is still a 40% completion rate on fourth down and is better than 0 of 1, which is what they were in their 2021 meeting, versus Ole Miss that was 5 of 5. So they had 17 downs converted between third and fourth down in that first matchup, and 4 between third and fourth down on Saturday. They only had 20 more yards than Tulane with 363 total yards compared to Tulane's 342. Most of that came in the air on passing, as they had 274 yards in the air. But something that stuck out the most to me in this game was the fact that their quarterback only completed 3 more passes than Kai Horton. Each quarterback threw an interception and only had about 30 more yards in the air. I'm sorry, not 30 more yards. Yes, I'm correct. About 40 yards in the air in his passing game. But Tulane was able to win the rushing battle pretty handily in this matchup. And that's something that I think is as promising on both sides of the football, considering Judkins for Ole Miss and the fact that last year he rushed for 1,476 yards. That's 100 more yards than Tajay Spears. Now, granted, Tajay also did that with 40 less carries and just one more rushing touchdown. But just to show kind of how much Judkins meant to the Ole Miss offense last year and what he was able to really record on his stat line, well, Tulane held him to something like 40 yards in this game. I know that the 89 yards got split up between him and Jackson Dart, and there are only so many numbers that I can keep in my short-term memory here. But that is, all things considered, this year's Deuce Vaughn that they were able to shut down pretty handily. And the difference is, unlike Adrian Martinez, Jackson Dart could actually throw a pass or two. But I think as much as you saw the linebacking group really step up and make those stops, you saw Mekhi Hughes come out on offense and make a pretty considerable argument to be looked at as running back one going into this week. I believe he had 92 yards, which is a career high for him, and one rushing touchdown. And that was on, not to mention, a Wildcat, which worked perfectly. And that was something that it was really reassuring to see them work that back into this repertoire and see that not be lost with Tajay Spears. But on offense, you're running into not just losing Michael Pratt, but I think you were still experiencing a little bit of the rollover effect of losing Tajay Spears. Because if we're going to go back and look at Kai Horton's starts in the past and what he was able to accomplish in Houston last year, I mean, for one, I think that the Tulane defense had a little bit easier day at the office and what they were able to shut down during that game. And not to mention, it was a night game. And so there were a lot of drives where Tulane really wasn't able to sustain and go 3 and out, believe more than one time on offense. And that was just asking a lot of a defense to kind of run all over the place, even though I would say that Tulane ultimately held the weather advantage in this game. But what you saw in Houston more than anything was, and it's not coincidental here, that Tajay Spears was not only the leading rusher for that game, he was also the leading receiver. And you have to consider how much that played or didn't play a role in this game, where I don't think any running backs have caught a pass, at least not in that game, unless I'm completely blanking here. But they don't have that same reliability that you could have lined Tajay Spears up wide and consistently gotten him to get positive yardage off of those receiving passes, as well as handing him the ball on first, second, or third down and him being able to do considerable damage. Tulane just ran kind of into a wall, I think, where I'm still going to stick with the patient approach of this running back battle, because let's talk about that for a second. A lot of people were saying, oh, well, the fact that Tulane doesn't have a running back one going into week one means that they don't really have a running back at all. And yeah, I guess you could make that argument if what we've seen the last 2 weeks didn't really play out the way that it did. But I keep bringing up the Saints quarterback competition that I was able to cover a few seasons ago. And I know that that's not an apples to apples comparison here, but it was one thing where they had someone there that had been there before in Jameis Winston. And I mean, the same argued for Taysom Hill, but people were just kind of arguing to hand over the job to Jameis Winston just based on resume. And I don't really think that that's ever a good argument in replacing a franchise quarterback. And if you could say a franchise running back exists, I think the closest thing that you're going to see to that in college is Tajay Spears and what he really meant to Tulane. Now, obviously, they were able to carry on with Michael Pratt at quarterback, and you saw how easy it is to get over those humps in the week one matchup. But I think, again, you're just asking a little too tall of a hill to climb for Kai Horton, where he doesn't have that surefire guy in the backfield. And something that I brought up before when talking about how if Michael Pratt was in this game, would Tulane have won? I mean, it's impossible to say, but you'd like to think that he was able to maybe convert some of those short yardage plays with his legs and keep those linebackers from rushing the box and giving his pocket a second to kind of have a minute to survive. Whereas, yeah, Kai Horton had, I believe, a design run in the early on in the game and ran, more or less for his life on some of the plays where the blocking just didn't work out. But he wasn't getting the benefit of the box necessarily respecting Tajay Spears and having to account for that, having a spy on him at all times. But you saw someone really emerge out of that backfield in Mekhi Hughes. And all of that to say, with this quarterback thing I was talking about, where if you had handed it to Jameis Winston at the beginning of training camp, I guess the end result wouldn't have really changed much because he ultimately ended up winning out the job, but he definitely had to earn it. And again, I just kind of saw the value in making players have to play for those spots. And it's safe to say that Mekhi Hughes was not going to be just given running back one off of resume, considering he didn't play last year. He had a problem with his knee and was out the season. Something that I keep thinking about, though, is how much time he spent off to the side working on his game with Tajay Spears, who would take a day or so off every week last year and kind of Tulane's load management of him. And he didn't really use that time just kind of sitting off to the side. He was very frequently wanting to coach up those running backs. And I just felt like there were so many times on Saturday where you could see those flashes of Tyjae Spears and what he was able to bring to Tulane's offense and the yardage that he was able to pick up that he just shouldn't have been able to, looking at it from, an objective stance. Like, I don't know, when he hurdled someone in the championship game, but this wasn't the first game now that Mekhi Hughes made several runs and got positive yardage when he really shouldn't have gotten any positive yardages at all. It was stopped 3 or 4 yards backwards. And I brought up how he kind of carried Michael Pratt over. It wasn't over a first down marker, but he was stopped at the line of scrimmage in last week's game. And Mekhi Hughes literally cradled him in his arms and dragged him 3 yards upfield. That takes a lot of upper body strength. That takes really fast instincts and decision-making and having downfield awareness in order to kind of understand, okay, well, he's stuffed here, but I see a lane here. I can kind of carry him up the field in my breadbasket, if you will. Well, you saw, I think, that same vision of just getting 1 or 2 more yardage and how much different that can make a drive. And I think how much juice that really instills in an offense. And it was a hard test going up against an SEC size line on both sides of the trenches. But I think that you saw both sides really be able to make that a contest on the line. And if you're able to handle a team in the trenches, a lot of the other problems that you have are definitely less bad in comparison, for lack of a better term. If we went out there and saw that Tulane just got manhandled and was completely losing the battle, either on the O-line or on the D-line, I know that there were a lot of times where Kai Horton was a little under duress, but I think, again, Michael Pratt just gets some of those balls out a little quicker and is probably able to diagnose the defense just a little faster as well. And that's why you have a starting quarterback and a backup quarterback, but you can't ask for a more battle-tested quarterback that can come in times of absolute chaos than you can in Kai Horton. The fact that every game that he's been in as a starter has been the most important game of the season. I know that we're only in week 2 and there's so much season to go, but I think the way that everyone talked about this matchup, safe to say a lot of people saw it as the most important game in Yulman Stadium history. And talking with Steve and Corey on Saturday, we're very much in the train of thought that the conference championship game and the implications of that win and what that was able to do for the program, infinitely more important than a win or a loss on Saturday, really. But I thought that you really just saw the atmosphere pay off and you saw all of those things really come together. You saw the crowd get there early. You saw them stay engaged, stay through halftime, all of those positive things. But ultimately, there's only so much you can do with the backup quarterback. And I thought that they handled that game for, 3.5 quarters just as best as they could. But I really have to give credit to the defense, and that's who I'm going to focus on in my next segment here and kind of dive into that more, because I just think that there's only so much dissecting that you can do where, again, you're talking about a quarterback that isn't your starter and you're talking about trying to replace a generational player at running back and just being in week 2 of that and seeing them still kind of continue that rotation with Arnold Barnes getting some of the carries this last Saturday. Obviously, it would have been a lot more helpful if they had one surefire guy there like Tyjae Spears that was able to both be, again, the leading rusher and receiver for Kai Horton in relief. But again, unfortunately, that wasn't able to happen this weekend. But talking about, again, losing just such an important player on both sides of the ball, both in turnover from last season and in immediate injury, you could apply just as much of that to the defense and trying to replace Corey Platt in this matchup. But really, when you're thinking about it, they're still replacing the void that was left from Dorian Williams and Nick Anderson. And not only an entire position group, but just talking about the intangibles that they brought off the field, but the fact that they led the team in tackles almost every single week and throughout the season were ultimately the first and second leading tacklers. Followed behind them were Larry Brooks and Lemmy Young. And not only did you see a lot of the safeties step up and make downhill tackles, really get down there to stop the run, that was something that was really promising to me, as well as really good play from Ken Pettislow in the slot. But you saw guys just continue to step up 2 weeks in a row now, losing your leading tackler in Corey Platt, who, again, one of the big question marks going into the South Alabama opener was, how good is this Tulane defense? And are they really going to be able to fill the entire middle of the field, defensively speaking, and all of the holes left there from, when you think about the leading top 4 tacklers, that's your starting safeties, starting linebackers, again, entire middle of the field, defensively speaking. As I'm saying this, it was not Lemmy Young, it was Macon Clark at nickelback, who was either the 3rd or 4th leading tackler. But my point still stands in getting so much of that play coming up the middle of the field from your defense, and to then lose who was seen as kind of that really good replacement in Corey Platt and have him again lead the team in tackles with 15 last week. But you also saw Jesus Machado in that mix last week. Well, it was really good to see Tyler Grubb step in, lead the team in tackles this week, follow up by Jesus Machado, and a lot of third and fourth down stops there by that linebacking group, as well as really being the reason that running game by Judkins got absolutely nowhere this Saturday. Looking forward to the rest of the season, I think that you can take a lot more out of the defense's performance than you can on the offensive side of the ball. Again, talking about just injuries and circumstances, but one of the things that carried Tulane through the first half of last season's stretch was the fact that their defense really held it down while their offense kind of got some growing pains going on their side of the ball, and there was no turnover. They had Michael Pratt, they had Tajay Spears. They did have injuries kind of bug them in the beginning of the year. Again, I think that Houston was in week 5 compared to week 2 this year, but it's a tall ask out of a defense that's led by new leaders and a new defensive coordinator and not a new group's position group coaches as well. And I think Tulane fans should really be confident that this defense is ready to contend for this entire season. I do my best to read off of my notes here that I took going through these drives to just kind of break down how well the defense really performed. And I think all of the promise that you were able to see out of so many different position groups, just going down to the third down stops, going through there were 8 different players on Tulane's defense that had third down stops, with Eric Hicks being the one player that had 2 recorded third down stops. The other players were Bailey Despaney, Jared Small, Tyler Grubbs, Devin Deal, Cam Pettisclo, DJ Douglas, and Lance Robinson had an interception on that play. Just going through that off the top of my head, there are 2 defensive linemen in there, 2 to 3 linebackers, and the rest are your safety group. And for all of those groups to have really come in and made third down stops, and not just that, going through the running game and how many plays either went for no gain or were stuffed for a loss. There were 7 different players that had either a no gain or loss on their stat sheet, and they had 8 total stops in the run defense that either went for no gain or for a loss. That is a lot of tackling that you need out of your defense. And it goes to show you that despite losing the 4 top leading tacklers for the entire season last year, that they were able to get that production out of several different position groups. Because again, going through those run stops and who were able to either stuff them for no gain or for a loss, there was Jesus Machado, who had, I would say, a half a loss with Jared Small, and then each of them had their own stops on the run game. Darius Swanson, Tyler Grubbs, Devin Deal, DJ Douglas, and Cam Pettisclo. Again, that's going through all 3 levels of your defense. And I remember during my pro day coverage where Corey, Laura, and I had done the ESPN Plus broadcast, and we had Willie Fritz on as one of our guests for that 3 or 4 hours long, however that was. And we were talking about why it's so difficult to replace that entire the middle of the field defensively speaking. A lot of that comes from the fact that they had guys in that secondary that really liked stopping the run, that come downhill, can take good angles in space and make those open field tackles. To see Bailey Despaney, DJ Douglas, Darius Swanson, those guys really flying downhill to make those run stuffs, that's something that'll continue to carry on from here. And not to mention that they had at least 3 quarterback hurries, and I believe there were 4 separate sacks or 5, and all of those coming from Patrick Jenkins, Darius Hodges, Eric Hicks, and Cam Hamilton. Again, it's not just one standout player on this defense. It's the fact that you're getting all 3 levels of your defense to contribute in several different ways. I know that Lance Robinson, again, had an interception on third down. That was his third down stop. They had several pass breakups by AJ Hampton, Cam Pettisclo, and I believe a defensive lineman had one in there at some point too. But those are really the stat lines, things that stick out to me. And the defense did not open the day starting very strong, if you will. They allowed a pretty wide open touchdown for Ole Miss, to which Tulane responded with a pretty decisive touchdown themselves. Took about 4.5 minutes off the clock and allowed the defense some time to rest. I am just going to go through these drives until it gets a little muddly at the end, just because I think, again, when you're looking at this game and thinking about what the takeaways are, you think about the fact that your starting quarterback is not in the game and you're still trying to figure out that answer at running back. You probably got some answers at running back in Mekhi Hughes and could probably lean on him a little more going into Southern Miss. No matter who's playing at quarterback, it's going to be a much easier day at the office against Southern Miss than it is against an SEC-sized school in Ole Miss. And so those question marks, I think, are a little less of an issue to me. I would be a lot more concerned if the way that the defense opened the game was how they continue to play for the rest of it. And again, just to go back, Troy defense, talking about Sheil Wood and really what he's already shown his ability to do with this Tulane defense. He had already faced these 2 offenses that Tulane's already had as Troy's defensive coordinator. They ended the year, or I believe, going against South Alabama, where they held them to 6 points and were the only team in that regular season to allow them less than 100 yards on the ground. Tulane accomplished that in their first matchup, but they opened the year against Ole Miss at Troy. And yes, it was a 28-10 loss. All that really coming in the first quarter because I believe they had 3 takeaways in the second half and they only allowed 7 points and something like 75 yards in the entire second half on defense. So I came into this game having the idea that at least the coaching was there in order for Tulane to really be able to shut this down. And I don't have those kind of exact stats of when things were forced in each half and what have you. But again, going through that, both teams open with a touchdown. Tulane's defense then holds them to a punt. They had 2 third down stops in that play. One of their quote unquote timeouts that no one actually saw them call. And I'm inclined to think those should have been fan impact plays of a delay of game. And then they also had a false start penalty on that same drive. Tulane's offense goes 3 and out on the next series and only take a minute and a half off the clock. Tulane's defense responds to that by holding them to 3 and out and forcing them to punt. Tulane then takes the lead with a field goal to go up 10-7. And the defense again holds them to a punt. They have 2 third down stops. And just again, context speaking, that was after Tulane actually took a lead and was able to hold that lead. And it was mostly because of what they were doing on defense. So after they hold Ole Miss to a punt following the field goal, Tulane's offense goes out there and they have to punt. Again, another 3 and out forced by the defense. That's 2 in a row and 3 punts in a row after allowing that first touchdown. And then Tulane goes up 17-7 with the touchdown on offense. Then the defense concedes a field goal to have it be 17-10. And that's how they went into half with the offense really running out the ball. And just again, you'd want them to start strong, but it's really about how you finish. And as you continue to go through this game and go through the fourth quarter and just talking about mentality and everything on the sideline, there was never a point in this game where I felt like the team had lost it already on the sideline. And I'll be honest, I felt those feelings in the Southern Miss and the UCF losses last year, even though I thought that their spirits and their mentality was a lot higher up in the UCF loss than it was to Southern Miss. You could kind of see that doubt start to creep in. Whereas I thought you saw this defense really feed on a challenge and a really awesome home atmosphere. And that set them into halftime with, again, a lot of promise on defense. Then the offense starts out the second half. They go 3 and out. Defense, again, holds them to a punt after that with Cam Pettislow having a pass breakup on 3rd down. And then Tulane ends up turning it over on downs. It's the only other touchdown up until that point that they allowed in the game. And that's when the score became tied in the 3rd quarter. But if you just look at what the defense was able to accomplish up to that point, make all these 3rd down stops. Again, they made 12 3rd down stops. Yes, they allowed 3 of 3 4th down stops, but just again, to see that not only happen at different times in the game, in different situations, but come from different position groups and different players and have all these guys step up after losing their leading tackler the week prior. After that touchdown, Tulane ends up punting again. Then the defense really put them in a position to win on 3rd and 12. Lance Robinson makes an interception. And again, this game is 17-all. Unfortunately, Kai Horton ends up throwing an interception on that play, some miscommunication going on between him and the receiver. And this to me is kind of where the game ended after they ultimately held Ole Miss to a field goal. They go up 20-17. Then Tulane ends up not converting that 4th down conversion. They started with about 12 minutes left in the 4th quarter. And by that time that they got down to the 4th and 2 that ultimately Kai Horton wasn't able to convert with his legs, that's when things started to really go downhill for the defense. But just going through that series by series and looking how players stepped up, how they completely stifled the run attack for Ole Miss. And again, made this quarterback have to beat them in the air. And they did. But I know that a game is all 4 quarters. And ultimately, we can talk about the decision making at the end of the game. And again, whether or not you're a proponent of onside kicking. And I will remind everyone that, again, Tulane was able to recover several successful onside kicks in their 2021 season, which made for somewhat of an annoying time every time I was going up. I keep the broadcast in my ear when the game is almost over, because unless it's the championship game or the Cotton Bowl last year, I'm upstairs hosting the post-game show. And I remember there were so many times going up in that 2021 season where I had it in my headset and it would start to cut out a little bit. And then all of a sudden I'd hear, oh, Tulane recovered an onside kick. Now Jaquan Jackson's gone down the field for 40 yards. It started to get annoying because ultimately those ended up being losses. But at the end of the day, it just goes to show that Tulane has made several comes from behind with onside kicks in the final minutes of the game, all of that to kind of tie into the decision-making in the Ole Miss game. And the fact that you have Greg McMahon on special teams as your coach, it makes sense. And I'm sure, I don't know the analytics, but knowing how Willie Fritz makes those types of decisions, I'm assuming the analytics kind of indicated that the onside kick was the right call there. And again, I just implore everyone, Ole Miss is probably running a lot different set of plays if they start that out of their end zone at the 20 versus, that halfway field position. And if we really want to get nitpicky here, I'm of the opinion, I was watching at this point from standing outside of the press box just because I can get a better vantage point. That play on 4th down, which they ultimately said was a false start on offense, and then they kicked that field goal, was very convenient. It was not the first time that game where it felt like it was a convenient call just to be up front. And there was no eon of a false start from what I was able to tell, not to mention that the entire play had already been run before the flag was thrown. And then, their kicker makes a career-long field goal. There's only so much that you could do about those circumstances, but the game went a little more lopsided towards the end. And all of this discussion about would Tulane still be in the polls if it was a 3-point loss, I guess that's all important discussions when you're looking down the line for New Year's Six games and conference championships and what have you. But I'll remind everyone that the 1-0 mentality of last year came out of the Southern Miss loss. And if we're going to compare losses, I'm not one to say moral victories, but I think you can take a lot more out of that loss to Ole Miss than you could have out of a lot of the wins that Tulane had last year, particularly their first 2 wins against UMass and Alcorn State. I don't think you learned much about the team, and I don't think the team really had any tests at all until they had to go down to Bill Snyder Stadium in Manhattan, Kansas, ultimately pulling off that upset. Something else I've been thinking about a lot as the last 2 days have just been kind of marinating in me is, I'm not going to say a team needs a loss and needs those hard times to get over the hump, but you think about all of the turnover of last year, all of the context and the storylines, and the biggest single season turnaround in college football history, coming back from that 2-10 year to ultimately beat the Heisman Trophy winner in the Cotton Bowl. There are a lot of players that are out there that want to make an impact on this team that weren't here for the last year or the season before that. And so asking them to form an identity based on last year's team doesn't really make that much sense to me. I think that you're going to see an identity of this team really be born out of this loss. And that's not to say that the 1-0 mentality is going to be replaced by another catchphrase, because I think that just downplays the effect of what that had last year and how that's just, again, it's much more of a mentality than it is a saying. But whatever they take out of this game, I think that you'll see that Tulane really has grit, that all of the comments people have said about the fact that Kurt Hester has made such a difference to this program, and you saw them really hold up against the Pac-12 line on both sides of the trenches in that Cotton Bowl win last year. I thought you saw them really go toe-to-toe with an SEC team that completely manhandled them the last time that I was on the sideline. Just if I'm going to compare those 2 losses, and again, this is just on its face with all the circumstances that I have in my head. Even though there was a hurricane and they were a lot less conditioned, you still had Michael Pratt out there. You still had your team leader and Nick Anderson out there, even though he had a broken leg starting in the first quarter of that game. But I thought you saw a lot of guys step up, both in the game, on the sideline, and in the post game. Tyler Grubbs, the linebacker who led the team in tackles that game and had several 3rd down stops and stuffs on those run plays for either no gain or for a loss. I would implore everyone to go find the video where he's talking about the mentality of this team, how he relates to Michael Pratt, and that idea of being hurt and not being able to go out there and win such a big game for your team, but also looking to those leaders, seeing how strong their heads are, and really thinking that they're building something special coming out of this loss. Again, if you're on defense, you're really unhappy with how the end of that game went. Otherwise, I would be damn proud of all 3 units of that defense being able to, again, completely stifle their rushing attack. And knowing that was something that Lane Kiffin was probably really going to want to accomplish for the season and to get his entire offense going. They didn't really get it going against Mercer, but Tulane did not give them any room there. Just, again, the difference that I would say between this and the other time that Tulane completely stifled a rush attack, which was that Kansas State win, was you saw a little bit better of a passing quarterback in Jackson Dart than you did in Adrian Martinez. But again, this is my 3rd season as a sideline reporter. I saw 10 losses my first year. I saw 2 last year. And if I'm going to compare all of those, they all couldn't have been more night and day from one another. And I would say the same about this one. But this is probably the best feeling that I've had after a loss, save for maybe the UCF loss last year. And again, I think we were all still kind of wondering, well, is Tulane going to face them again in the championship? Are they going to be able to come out against a short week? Because that next game was against SMU on a Thursday. Hello to how Tulane has responded to their losses last season. Again, just thinking about going out of that Southern Miss loss to the overtime win in Houston with Kai Horton and all of the storybook that carried now into this year, and the fact that they're now playing Southern Miss again, except this time they're not coming on the heels of a loss, or they are coming on the heels of a loss, not a win. And I remember when people were asking if perhaps the South Alabama game was a trap game. I'm a firm believer in it being nearly impossible for the first game of the year to be a potential trap game. I said, if anything, it could again be that Southern Miss game, depending on whether or not they beat Ole Miss. And obviously you're not going to have that question about whether or not they're going to, be riding high on that win. I think that you're really going to see this chip on shoulder mentality formulate out of Tulane. And to be honest with you, I think that's the best position that they could be in, because that's really how they ran the table last year, just believing in themselves, shutting out all the outside noise. They didn't care about the rankings last year. They wouldn't even acknowledge them last year in the middle of the season because they were so focused on each game in front of them. And I think that you're going to see that same thing take hold this year after this loss, after the wins that follow. But again, I was really going into that game, learning that day that Michael Pratt wasn't going to play, not wanting to put too much on Kai Horton's shoulders, and really just wanting to see how the team rallied around Kai Horton for a third year in a row, and whether the defense was able to step up with all of the big names that we were used to from last season not being there, because this would be a game that, again, the leadership of Nick and Dorian would have been prime for the taking. But what you learned is you didn't need those guys. And you didn't need Corey Platt as much as you would have liked to have him for several of those series. You saw that Jared Small, Jesus Machado, and Tyler Grubbs are a strong force to be reckoned with as a linebacking group. Sitting in on some of the meetings during the game, it just continues to stick out to me that the defensive coordinator is the linebacker coach. And talking to Tyler Grubbs at Media Day before the season started, I brought this up, but he said how valuable it is, and that this is actually the third year his defensive coordinator has been his position group coach. So he's just had a wealth of learning at his fingertips. But hearing that they're able to ask any questions about what the first, second, and third level are doing, and that they're really able to have that kind of collaboration, it's good to see that really continuing on the sideline in those meetings, and see that the frustration that you saw out of the defensive meetings in the first game, that Shield Wood got pretty hard on them during one series, that was really limited to the circumstances of that game. I thought that he really handled the sidelines as good as possible. The momentum was always up, and was really emphasizing that he wanted feedback, that the players had to be answering these questions. He's not just up here drawing things on a board. This is meant to be an interactive thing. And hearing the players be able to answer these questions about what routes to take, they looked a little more confused last year. And I think they last week, and needed a little bit more rallying. But these guys just really seemed locked in, and that they're going to lick their wounds from this loss. It's going to be the 24-hour rule, but they still have something to prove. And I really think that you're going to see all of that kind of come out on the field next Saturday. And I don't really think it matters who is playing quarterback, because I think that with a defense like this, you can be looking at the rest of the season and thinking that Tulane can really make a run here. And that's probably the most positive that I'm ever going to be after a loss. But when you consider the opponent, when you consider the circumstances, and you consider 3.5 quarters of that game, Tulane definitely showed that they were meant to be just as much of a draw on last week's. Tulane went to show you that they were just as much of a draw on this past Saturday as Ole Miss was. And even though there were quite a bit of Ole Miss fans in the stands, to hear the crowd that entire matchup, the fact that the student section stayed, I know they left towards the end of the game, but it was extremely hot during that game. I'm still feeling the effects of it, as I think, again, there's some link between dehydration and your nerves getting pinched. And same thing happened to Mackenzie Mitchell, my sidekick on the sideline. So I'm inclined to believe that it was the field conditions. And I did see Grace Vanderbrook, another girl on the sidelines at the Saints game the next day. We both just looked burnt out, to say the least. So I am proud of that entire stadium. I know that the students, I wasn't there, but I'm seeing that they were a little messy towards one of the gates. And once the student section was full, they're trying to knock over barriers. Don't do that, guys. Don't be that team. Don't be that fan base. It's just not a good look. And there's nothing that the stadium can do about it. There's nothing that those security guards are going to be able to do about it. And you risk someone getting hurt, and you risk a lot of the crowds getting funneled into one entry gate and then people not being able to fill the stands for the opening of that game. So good manners heading into our next home game, which is in 2 weeks against Nicholls State. But all of that to say, there were times where I was getting yelled at by the stadium behind me. I realized that it was the parent section, who I've yelled at a few times as well, in good love, yelling a roll wave and looking at me and the cheerleaders like, why aren't you guys getting going here? And just hearing again that it wasn't even just on third down. It was first, second down, fourth down was so loud. And if you ask me, there should have been 2 more delay of games or false starts, what have you. I am very much of the opinion that there were 2 timeouts called that were very much not called. But being a Saints fan my entire life, I very much learned that you cannot rely on referees in order to seal your fate. And you learn that one way or the other this past Saturday. But I think you learn more about this team and their identity than I was perhaps expecting, especially in a loss. And that much information in week 2 and a team that has so much turnover at all these coaching positions and all of these key positions on defense. And to see that, yeah, your second string quarterback ultimately didn't perform as well as your starting quarterback did, but made it a contest for as long as he did, kept this game a really credible contest until it got away from them at the end. And I think it was really that drive where Tulane recorded an interception, then Kai Horton threw one on the following series, that things kind of started to go downhill from there. But all in all, moral victories aside, hell of a loss for Tulane, and really sets them up well to be looking to go 1-0 this week.